Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the wilderness. A place without lighters, gas stoves, or YouTube tutorials to bail you out. Imagine standing in the middle of nowhere with the air damp enough to choke a match and your fingers numb from cold. The ground smells of pine sap and wet earth. You can hear a stream somewhere close. But right now, the only thing that matters is fire. Because without it, you're not making it till morning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and the time where you're watching this. I love seeing where in the world this cozy campfire of ours reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside a damp patch of forest floor, hands raw and trembling. The frontier wasn't a place that gave you second chances. Back then, the art of making fire wasn't just a skill, it was proof you deserved to stay alive. The men and women who crossed these wild lands didn't have fancy magnesium strikers or neatly labeled tinder boxes. They had flint, steel, patience, and a kind of quiet confidence that the modern world's long forgotten. You strike the steel. A spark leaps, a flicker of hope, and then dies. The smell of singed bark lingers in the air like mockery. You try again, angling the shard of stone, scraping with rhythm, letting the metallic ring echo into the dusk. Finally, a shy ember lands on the dry heart of your tinder bundle. You blow gently. The ember blushes orange, then gold. Suddenly the bundle exhales smoke. For a moment, it feels like breathing life into the universe itself. This was the first test every frontiersman faced. Fire. Not just for warmth or cooking, but for signaling, protection, even sanity. Early travelers often said a fire was off a man's heart, on the trail. Without it, even the strongest froze or starved before dawn. Historically, flint and steel were the go-to method, until the early 19th century when percussion caps made ignition faster. But before that innovation, fire was coaxed from friction. A bow drill, 2 sticks, and a prayer, that's all you had. Archaeologists still argue whether the technique was more efficient than striking flint, but for frontiersmen with limited steel, friction fire was the fallback. You imagine yourself holding the spindle upright, twisting it with the bowstring's pull. It squeals against the fireboard, wood dust building at the socket. Smoke curls up, and your muscles ache, but this is what survival feels like, turning struggle into heat. And then, there were stranger tricks. The Iroquois taught some settlers to ignite punky wood with a magnifying lens. The trick only worked in bright daylight, but it felt like magic, sunlight caught in your palm. There's even one recorded account of a trapper using gunpowder dust to start a fire when all else failed, blowing off half his eyebrows in the process. That's one way to warm up, I guess. You glance around, thinking about all the ways fire shaped life out here. Campfires were both lifeline and liability. Their glow could attract predators, or worse, desperate people. Some travelers built cold camps, sleeping near piles of hot stones heated earlier, leaving no light to betray their presence. Others learned to build fires underground, in pits lined with green leaves and dirt, where the smoke could seep out unseen. There's a strange intimacy to those fires. Picture a circle of travelers wrapped in hides, steam rising from their breath, staring into the coals like they're reading their own fates. One of them whittles a stick. Another hums a tune low enough to blend with the wind. Every flame flicker feels sacred because it means they've won. Just for tonight. Of course, not every method worked. There's an odd record from a frontier diary around 1825 where a man tried to light kindling with lightning struck stones because he heard it made the fire more lively. Spoiler, it didn't. The only thing lively afterward was his cursing. Historians still argue whether these tales are truth or tall legend, but they reveal something deeper. The way survival blurred into folklore. As your tiny flame steadies, it crackles softly, painting gold on your knuckles. The smell of wood smoke fills your lungs warm and earthy, and you realize how primal this moment is. Humans have been making fire for at least 1 million years. Yet here it's still a miracle. The frontiersmen didn't just make fire, they mastered its moods. They learned which woods sparked brightest, birch and hickory, which ones smoked too much, green pine, and how even a damp moss ball could smolder for hours like a pocket heater. They learned to bank coals under ashes before sleep, preserving them for the next morning. A small act that saved hours of effort, and possibly their lives. Sometimes they even carried glowing embers in hollowed horns or gourds, swaddled in moss. Imagine walking through a snowstorm with a tiny ember tucked in your coat, your private sun beating weakly against the cold. You lean closer to your imagined campfire, and for a moment you're with them. The hunters, trappers, wanderers who crossed mountains and prairies with nothing but stubbornness and sparks. You can hear the hiss of sap, the crack of a shifting log, the slow heartbeat of survival itself. There's something poetic about it, isn't there? In a world of endless convenience, the idea that a single flame once meant everything. These forgotten skills weren't just about practicality, they were about connection, to the earth, to the moment, to yourself. Because when all else fades, the maps, the tools, the noise, What's left is you, your breath, and a trembling spark you coax into life. And maybe that's the real lesson of the frontiers. You can lose everything and still make fire. The night deepens around your small flame, but the darkness doesn't feel so vast anymore. You can almost hear a voice from another century whispering, "Now you're one of us." You wake to the gray hush before dawn, your fire nothing but a heap of cooling coals. The world smells like smoke, pine, and frost. Your blanket, or whatever counts as one, is crusted with dew, and your breath fogs in the air like a ghost that hasn't decided if it's ready to move on. The wilderness doesn't wait for your comfort. Out here, if you want shelter, you make it, or the wind will make you wish you had. You stretch, joints creaking like frozen leather, and begin your morning ritual scanning the trees, the terrain, the shadows. A good frontiersman didn't just pick a campsite, he read it. Slopes that shed rain, hollows that trap cold, ridges that draw lightning. Every inch of land came with a secret, and your life depended on knowing which ones to listen to. Shelter was never one size fits all. You had to judge the weather's mood like it was a living thing. On mild nights, a lean-to might do, 2 poles, a draped hide, and the hope that the wind wouldn't change its mind. In rain or snow, though, you learned to think lower, tighter. Some built brush shelters so compact that crawling inside felt like sliding into an animal burrow. Others shaped snow dens. Yes, literal igloo-style shelters that could trap heat so well your breath alone could warm the space. Historians still argue whether settlers borrowed those tricks directly from native tribes or rediscovered them through sheer necessity. You kneel and picture it cutting pine boughs, weaving them together, stacking them like shingles. The smell of resin is sharp, sweet. The rhythm becomes hypnotic: cut, weave, press, repeat. Before long, you've created something that's not quite home, but close enough for one night. There's a common saying among old trappers: a dry head means a living man. The rest could freeze, but as long as your head stayed dry, your body had a fighting chance. So, they'd layer roofs thick with bark, then pile leaves, then another coat of mud. Ugly, yes, but waterproof. In the morning, their shelters often looked like lumps of forest. Maybe that was the point: the wilderness couldn't hurt what it couldn't see. Not every frontier shelter was crude, though. Some were almost elegant in their simplicity. You'd have envied the prairie sod houses. Those early pioneers stacking chunks of earth like bricks, roofs reinforced with brush and clay. In the Great Plains, where trees were rarer than kindness, dirt became architecture. And somehow, despite the leaks, the bugs, and the smell, those soddies stood against tornadoes better than many wooden cabins. You shift in your seat, or maybe in your imagination, feeling the cold seep through your clothes. You picture the long process of gathering materials, the sting of bark against your palms, the slow satisfaction when the first raindrops roll harmlessly down the roof you made. That's the moment survival turns to pride. One fringe skill frontiersmen swore by was the earth shelf, a trick borrowed from indigenous builders. You dig shallow into a slope, line it with stones, and stretch animal hides overhead, creating a half-buried shelter that could stay cool in summer and warm in winter. Archaeologists still debate how widespread that design really was, but evidence from old campsites in Montana and Alberta suggests it wasn't rare. The strangest story, though, comes from an 1800s trader who claimed to survive an entire blizzard sleeping inside a hollowed-out buffalo carcass. Disgusting, absolutely, but apparently effective. The internal heat of the beast insulated him until morning. Historians still argue whether it's true or tall tale, but the principle checks out. You don't need comfort, you just need warmth. And warmth out here was a currency more valuable than gold. The moment you stopped building, the cold crept back in like an uninvited guest. That's why shelters weren't just walls, they were strategies. You might pack mud between logs to stop drafts, hang wet clothes near the ceiling where smoke gathered, yes, that counts as a dryad. Or lay evergreen boughs under your bedroll to keep the ground from stealing your heat. You'd be amazed how much thought went into sleeping. A seasoned frontiersman could build a bed that kept him off the frozen earth, using nothing but saplings and rope made from inner bark. Sometimes they'd sprinkle ash beneath to ward off insects. One journal even mentions using cattail fluff as insulation, describing it as warm as down and twice as stubborn. You wonder how long it would take you to figure all this out on your own. Probably not long. Fear is the best teacher, and the wilderness offers plenty of homework. As daylight stretches across the treetops, your shelter glows softly, the dew turning to steam. You sit inside, listening to the wind press against the bark, and realize something: the sound isn't threatening anymore. It's company. Out here, isolation transforms into a kind of companionship. Every groan of wood, every drip of rain becomes a heartbeat reminding you that you're not alone. You're just small. The frontiersmen knew that well. They didn't fight nature, they adapted, shaped, and folded themselves into it like another creature learning its place. There's a bit of humor in it, too. One diary from 1843 records a man who built his cabin backward, door facing into the wind, and spent the winter calling it God's idea of a joke. He never fixed it, just adapted. hanging an old coat over the doorway as insulation. Practical laziness at its finest. When night returns, you build a small fire near the entrance. Its glow dances across the bark, amber and alive. You imagine the settlers of centuries past doing the same, each flame a signal to no one and everyone still here. And in that light, the shelter becomes more than protection. It becomes proof. Proof that even when stripped of everything modern, steel, screens, schedules, you can still claim a corner of the world as your own. You reach out, running a hand along the rough texture of the wall you built. It's not perfect, it leaks, it creaks, but it's yours. And tomorrow, when the wind shifts or the rain comes harder, you'll build again, maybe better, maybe worse, but always learning, because that's what kept the frontiersmen alive. Not just strength or tools, but the stubborn creativity to turn chaos into comfort. So, as you curl up against the soft sigh of your makeshift roof, the forest hums outside, endless and indifferent. You close your eyes, half expecting the night to take you, but it doesn't. It just watches, quietly, and for now, that's enough. The morning smells cleaner now, sharp air, damp moss, and the faint sweetness of last night's smoke. You blink into the pale light and think about water. The irony of the frontier was that people could die of thirst while surrounded by rivers, streams, and glittering puddles. Out here, water wasn't just about finding it. It was about making sure it didn't kill you first. You stand, stretch the stiffness from your spine, and listen. The wilderness has its own language if you're quiet enough to hear it. Birds chatter differently near water. Insects buzz louder. Even the wind shifts temperature. The old frontiersmen swore you could smell water, a faint mineral tang beneath the scent of leaves. Some called it nonsense, others swore by it. Historians still argue whether this sense was trained instinct or just wishful desperation. You start walking downhill, always the first rule. Gravity has a habit of leading you toward rivers, and rivers, if you're lucky, lead you toward life. The soil grows softer underfoot, a dragonfly zips past. You pause, kneeling to study the earth, muddy paw prints. Deer may be 2 hours old. You follow them, because where animals drink, you can too. When you finally spot the glimmer of water through the trees, you almost laugh. Relief has a sound, and it's the splash of a shallow stream tumbling over rocks. You crouch beside it, but instinct, or maybe memory, stops you. You've read too many stories of people who gulped without thinking, only to end up retching, fevered, or worse. In the 1800s, diseases like cholera and dysentery swept through camps faster than bullets. Entire wagon trains were wiped out not by hunger or wolves, but by the invisible killers lurking in clean-looking water. You picture some wary traveler dipping his tin cup, drinking deep, and sealing his fate. It's grim, but it's real. That's why the frontiersmen learned purification, not as science but as ritual. Boil it if you can. If you can't, filter it. If you can't filter it, pray over it. You gather dry bark, lay it near the stream, and build a small fire pit lined with stones. The crackle sounds like applause for your effort. You fill your pot, an imaginary, blackened thing that's seen better days, and wait as the first tiny bubbles shimmer to life. There's something meditative about it, watching chaos settle into control, danger into safety. Boiling was the frontier's version of insurance. The rule of thumb was a full rolling minute, though some journals mention keeping it over the flames until it no longer smelled of the earth. But sometimes boiling wasn't an option. No pot, no fuel, no time. So they turned to other methods. You'd be surprised how inventive people became when their throats felt like sandpaper. One quirky method used charcoal from old campfires, grind it fine, wrap it in cloth, and drip water through. Crude carbon filtration, primitive but effective. Another used sphagnum moss, known to have natural antiseptic properties. A few even carried water stones, porous rocks from riverbeds believed to absorb impurities. Whether those actually worked, well, historians still argue about that one. You cup your hands and lift a sip of the boiled water. It's still earthy, faintly bitter, but safe. And in that small act, you've conquered one of the wilderness's cruelest tests. Of course, finding water wasn't always this easy. On the plains with miles of nothing but grass and wind, settlers learned to watch the animals instead. Bees meant water within a mile. Ant trails hinted at damp soil. Even tiny frogs in cracked mud told a story water used to be here, and maybe still was buried beneath the dust. Some pioneers dug for it. They'd find a patch where the grass grew greener, drive a stick deep into the ground, and wait. If it came up damp, they'd start digging, sometimes for hours. Other times, they'd find it the hard way, by tasting dew-off leaves at dawn or catching rainwater in upturned hides. A few even claimed to use divining rods, forked sticks that trembled when pointed toward underground streams. Scientists roll their eyes at that, of course. But the strangest part, sometimes it actually worked. You imagine that sense of faith, walking through heat so dry it cracks your lips, trusting a piece of wood to lead you to salvation. Maybe it wasn't the stick at all. Maybe it was intuition, disguised as magic. And then, there were the tricksters of thirst, the false springs, the alkali ponds that looked pristine but reeked of poison. Some explorers wrote about shimmering mirages that promised cool relief but led them straight into salt flats. Even when they found real water, minerals could betray them. Too much iron, too much lime, even too much life. Worms, leeches, bacteria. One man's blessing was another's grave. Still, necessity breeds genius. Frontier guides taught newcomers to test unknown water by touching it to their lips first, not drinking. If it tasted metallic or slick, leave it. If it smelled like rotten eggs, walk away. If animals avoided it, run. There's one strange note from an 1852 explorer who swore by spider wells. When trapped without a stream, he followed spider webs, because spiders, he said, only spun near humidity. He'd dig beneath the densest web cluster and often find damp soil. Was it science? Maybe not. Was it survival? Absolutely. You kneel again, hands cupped around the stream. The reflection that stares back at you looks older, hungrier, maybe wiser. You think of those who crossed deserts and mountains long before bottled water and sports drinks. Their blisters told stories no map could capture. And every drop they drank came with the knowledge it might be their last clean one for days. There's a strange calm in that thought, because even now, surrounded by modern comfort, something in you understands the primal joy of earning your water. The first sip after struggle tastes like life itself. You fill your canteen, seal it, and glance up at the sky. Clouds are gathering soft, swollen things drifting slow as memory. Rain means abundance, but also challenge. Frontier folk used to collect it off stretched hides or oiled cloth, funneling it into barrels. Sometimes they'd add charcoal to keep it fresh. One diary even describes floating a silver coin in the barrel, to keep the devil from spoiling the taste. Maybe superstition, maybe early chemistry. Silver is antimicrobial after all. As the first raindrops fall, you tilt your head back and open your mouth. It's cold, metallic, wild. The kind of water no filter could improve. And in that moment, you realize what the frontiersmen knew all along: water isn't just survival, it's communion. Every sip binds you to the land, to the storms, to the rivers that carved mountains long before you got here. You take one more drink, savoring the chill. The rain thickens, drumming against your shelter, your skin, your soul. Somewhere in that rhythm, you can almost your stomach growls loud enough to startle a squirrel. It's the kind of deep, echoing hunger that makes the whole forest seem edible. And maybe it is, if you know where to look. The frontier was never kind to those who waited for meals to appear. Out here, eating meant earning, and that could mean stalking, digging, or sometimes just being desperate enough to try something you swore wasn't food yesterday. You glance around. The forest seems generous at first glance. Berries, mushrooms, roots. But generosity here comes with fine print. Eat the wrong thing, and you'll be seeing colors the skies never made before. Or worse, you'll stop seeing anything at all. The old frontiersmen had rules for foraging. Rule 1. If it looks too pretty, it'll kill you. Bright berries, glossy leaves, milky sap, all warning signs. Rule 2. Animals lie. Just because a bird eats it doesn't mean you should. And Rule 3, the most sacred of all. If you don't know, don't swallow. Simple. Life-saving. You kneel beside a bush heavy with purple berries, remembering that one. Elderberries, maybe. Deadly nightshade, also maybe. The two look almost identical unless you've learned the subtle difference. The shape of the leaves, the color of the stem. A wrong guess in this test doesn't just ruin dinner, it ends it. So, you pass on the berries and start digging near the stream bank. Wild onions. The scent gives them away, sharp and earthy. You pry them loose with a stick, feeling the soft crunch of soil beneath your fingers. It's strange how something so small can feel like victory. In the frontier days, foraging was half science, half superstition. The settlers learned from indigenous tribes who'd mastered local flora long before Europeans arrived. They knew which greens healed and which hurt, which mushrooms hid poison beneath beauty. Dandelion roots roasted like coffee, cattail shoots cooked like asparagus, acorns leached of bitterness in running water. Every plant had a use, food, medicine, or tool. You just had to earn the knowledge. But plants alone rarely kept bellies full. Protein came from movement, from the chase, the snare, the trap. You find a sturdy sapling, bend it, and imagine looping a cord of sinew or bark fiber into a small noose. The frontiersmen called these figure 4 traps. Clever little contraptions that relied on gravity, patience, and luck. Leave a few along a rabbit trail, and with luck, breakfast might literally walk into your hands. The sound of the wind carries a memory. Old voices laughing around a campfire, boasting about who caught the biggest hare or the fattest squirrel. Hunting was work, but it was also identity. The rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a lifeline, a status symbol, and sometimes a friend. You can almost feel the weight of one across your lap now, its metal cold and honest. Still, bullets were precious. Many hunters preferred snares or deadfalls, conserving powder for bigger game. Some even practiced quiet kills with throwing sticks or slings. There's a frontier journal from 1837 where a man claims he survived 2 months eating nothing but what he could hit with a rock. Historians debate whether it's true, but considering his journal ends abruptly, it probably wasn't sustainable. You smile, the kind of wry amusement that even hunger can't dull. Humor was another survival tool. After all, when game was scarce, the settlers turned to improvisation. They boiled bark for soup, specifically inner pine or birch, which softened into a chewy, edible paste. They roasted crickets, fried grasshoppers, and claimed, "They taste like popcorn." So they didn't. You can almost hear them joking. At least they don't bite back, as they stir the pot of questionable stew. And that stew, oh, the famous frontier mystery stew, a catch-all dish that could contain anything from rabbit and roots to yesterday's leftovers and today's mistakes. The secret, apparently, was to keep the pot simmering for days, adding water, salt, and new ingredients as needed. You never finished it, you just kept it alive. One of the more curious recipes came from trappers in the Rockies who swore by stone soup. The method was simple: clean a round river rock, drop it into a boiling pot, and then start adding whatever scraps you had. The stone supposedly kept the broth from spoiling. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just an excuse to make empty pots look full. Either way, it's oddly comforting. The idea that even a rock could become part of dinner if you believed in it enough. You sit near your imaginary fire, nibbling on a mental meal of roasted root and charred fish. It's not glamorous, but it's earned. You think about how many of those frontiersmen died with empty stomachs, and how many survived by daring to experiment. They learned to smoke meat for preservation, to hang strips over slow coals until they turned dark and leathery. Jerky wasn't luxury, it was insurance. And speaking of strange insurance, here's a fringe survival tidbit. Some travelers carried hardtack, a flour and water biscuit so dense it could double as a weapon. To eat it, you'd have to soak it in coffee or stew until it softened. One soldier described it as chewing a barn door until it gives up. You laugh softly. At least it didn't spoil. When things got truly desperate, people turned to even stranger sources. Leather boots boiled into broth, candle wax shaved into rations. There's a documented case of gold rush miners in 1849 boiling their gloves to survive a snowstorm. Desperate, yes. Effective, somewhat. Edible, debatable. You can almost feel that kind of hunger now, annoying that strips pride bare. The kind that teaches humility, resourcefulness, even gratitude. Because when you finally do catch that rabbit or dig up those roots, the first bite isn't just food, it's triumph. The rain has stopped. You lean back, belly warm, the aftertaste of smoke on your tongue. Somewhere out there, you know others are hunting, gathering, surviving the same way, guided by instincts older than history. The forest hums softly, and your eyes grow heavy. You realize that, just like the frontiersmen, you've learned the rhythm of survival: find, eat, rest, repeat. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way forward. And maybe, just maybe, when you wake tomorrow, the forest will look a little more like a friend, and a little less like something trying to eat you. The forest changes once you've eaten. You start to notice the tiny things you missed before: the crushed fern underfoot, the faint scuff of a claw mark on bark, the low hum of insects hiding in moss. Out here, every sound, every broken twig, every bent blade of grass tells a story. You just have to learn how to read it. That's what frontiersmen called woodcraft. The art of seeing without looking, listening without staring, understanding the land like it's whispering secrets. To a greenhorn, the wilderness looked random, chaotic. To a seasoned traveler, it was a living diary, and every footprint, every snapped branch was a word. You kneel near a patch of mud by the stream, eyes narrowing. There, fresh tracks. Took-toed cloven. A deer, maybe a doe. You can tell by the size, narrow, delicate, and the spacing of the steps, evenly measured. She wasn't running, just walking, relaxed. You trace one print with your finger, feeling the faint ridge where the hoof pressed deeper on the inside edge. That means she turned left. The frontiersmen could read that at a glance. To them, tracks were time stamps, stories frozen in earth. They judged the depth, direction, and even emotion behind them. A wide stride and uneven pattern, panic, tight steps and deep impressions, exhaustion. They'd know how long ago it passed by touching the center of the print, if it was still damp or if the edges had begun to crumble. You try it yourself. Cool. Maybe an hour old. Close enough to matter. Of course, it wasn't all animal tracks. Human ones mattered more. Some frontiersmen could tell a man's gait just from his footprint. Whether he was carrying weight, favoring a leg, even what mood he was in. That wasn't legend, that was survival. If you saw unfamiliar boot tracks near your camp, you needed to know whether to welcome or vanish. There's a story from an 1839 trapper's journal about a man named Ephraim Cutter who tracked a stranger for 3 days just to confirm whether he was friend or foe. When he finally caught up, it turned out the man was tracking him. They ended up sharing a fire and laughing about it. Still, the habit stuck. Never ignore a footprint. Historians still argue whether these tracking skills came purely from necessity or if they were borrowed from native scouts. Truth is, the lines blurred. Many settlers learned directly from tribes who'd spent centuries perfecting the craft. To them, tracking wasn't hunting, it was reading the earth's memory. You crouch lower, following the deer trail deeper into the woods, broken stems, a tuft of fur on bark, dropping still soft. All signs point forward. You move silently, rolling each step from heel to toe. The ground gives without complaint. That was another trick, learning how to walk quietly. The technique: keep your weight on the back foot until the front one finds solid ground. Step lightly, pause often. The forest notices rhythm, so break it. Walk 3 steps, stop. 2 more, crouch. The silence feels alive now, like the trees are holding their breath with you. You remember what one old mountain man reportedly said: "The best hunters ain't quiet. They make the woods forget they're there." That's a skill lost on most of us now. We stomp through forests like we own them, but the frontiersmen knew better. Out there you're a guest, and not always a welcome one. Still, even the most skilled trackers could be fooled. Rain could erase prints, wind could scatter scent, snow could bury trails within minutes. One quirky trick was dusting ashes or flour across the ground near camp at night. So any intruder, animal or human, left a visible sign by morning. Creepy a little, effective. Absolutely. There's another curious method called listening for the hunt. When tracks failed, ears took over. Experienced woodsmen could identify animals by the cadence of their steps, the way branches snapped under different weights. Deer, they said, moved with grace. Bears with confidence. Humans with guilt. You can almost hear the frontier humor in that. But tracking wasn't just about hunting. It was navigation. Trails told you where water flowed, where herds migrated, where others had survived before you. Some trappers even carved secret codes into trees or arranged stones as markers. Little whispers left for those who might follow. It said you could tell a friendly camp by 3 stacked stones, or danger by 2 crossed sticks. Historians still debate how universal those signs were, but enough journals mention them to make it plausible. You pause at a muddy hollow. The deer's prints vanish into the grass, but something else catches your eye. Smaller tracks, round, clawed. Raccoon. No, too large. Maybe a small bear. Your heart speeds up. Out here, curiosity can turn into a mistake fast. You remember what the frontiersmen used to say: if you can track it, it can track you. You glance over your shoulder, half expecting movement. Just trees, just wind. You exhale, laughing softly at yourself. Still, it's not a bad reminder that the frontier wasn't just about mastering the wild. It was about respecting it. Even today, scientists studying ancient trails admit how impressive that instinct was. Modern GPS can tell you where you are. But those early travelers could tell you where everything else had been. They didn't see dirt, they saw stories layered over centuries. You keep walking until you reach a clearing where the trail ends. The sun pierces through the branches, painting long golden fingers across the ground. You can almost imagine someone kneeling here 200 years ago, reading the same marks, thinking the same thoughts. The connection feels intimate, timeless. There's something quietly profound about that. How the land remembers, even when people don't. Every broken twig is a whisper of movement. Every print a promise that life passed this way once and might again. You stand, brush the dirt from your knees, and look around. You realize that this skill, this reading of signs, isn't just about finding others. It's about finding yourself among them. The same curiosity, the same fear, the same hunger. Different centuries, same instincts. As the wind stirs the grass, you almost hear it. The faint sound of hooves in the distance. Or maybe it's just your heartbeat echoing back through time. Either way, you smile. Because tonight, when you follow those tracks back to your fire, you'll know something the frontiersmen knew well: the wilderness is never silent. It just waits for you to listen. Night creeps in early on the frontier. The forest exhales mist as the air cools, and the world seems to shrink to the small circle of light your campfire carves out. You sit cross-legged beside it, a thin curl of smoke twisting into the dark like a signal no one will answer. The day's trail fades behind you, but another problem rises ahead, cold, gnawing, and patient. You think back to the old stories, how frontiersmen endured winters that could turn breath to frost before it left your lips, how they survived when the thermometer plunged and the wind itself felt like a knife. Fire, shelter, and wit. That was the trinity that kept them alive. And tonight, it's your turn to test it. The first rule: never waste warmth. Every scrap of heat was precious, every ember a treasure. Frontiersmen often built their fires half in the open, half shielded by rock or logs, so the heat bounced back at them. They'd call it a reflector fire. Ingenious, really. A one-man heating system made from whatever nature provided. You stack your own logs the same way, copying the angle you remember from a sketch once seen in a survival book. The flames leap higher, licking the night. The warmth touches your face, soft and steady. And for a fleeting second, you understand how a man alone in the mountains might have felt not powerful, but blessed. But warmth was never guaranteed. Sometimes the fuel was wet, the snow too thick, the air too thin. That's when other tricks came into play. Some trappers carried a small pouch of dried moss and birch bark, nature's tinder. A spark from flint and steel could coax a flame from it even in the worst conditions. And if not, they'd use fat wood. Strips of resin, soaked pine that burned like candles. You can almost smell it, sweet, smoky, stubborn. There's a quirky detail about some mountain men who swore by carrying a live coal wrapped in moss through the night, so they wouldn't have to strike a new flame each morning. Dangerous. Yes, but effective. You picture it, one glowing ember tucked inside a bedroll like a heartbeat of fire. Historians still argue whether this trick came from native practice or European miners. Either way, it worked, and that's what mattered out here. You stretch your hands toward your own fire, watching sparks drift upward like tiny stars breaking free. You'd think this warmth would last, but a frontiersman knew better. The fire was only part of the equation. The rest came down to how well you built your shelter. They called them brush shacks, lean-tus, or simply night houses. Nothing fancy. Just a frame of sticks lashed together, packed with leaves, moss, and bark. The secret wasn't materials, it was placement. A good trapper never slept at the top of a hill too windy, or the bottom of a valley too damp. They'd find a midpoint slope, where air moved gently and smoke from the fire would drift away instead of smothering them. You look around and spot the ideal place. A gentle rise beside a fallen tree. You can almost see it in your mind, the way branches interlock, the way shadows fold together. The quiet satisfaction of stepping inside something you built with your own hands. That's another thing most people forget. Those shelters weren't just for warmth. They were psychological armor. The wilderness could feel infinite at night, and having even a crude wall of bark between you and that black abyss meant you could finally rest. There's a saying attributed to one mountain man, though no one's sure who said it first. You can fight hunger and thirst, but you can't fight loneliness. Maybe that's why they often built fires on both sides of their shelters. One for heat, one for company. As you settle against the fallen log, you can almost imagine another fire glowing just out of reach, like an old friend sitting silently across from you. You start to think about all the strange, clever ways people cheated death out here. When clothing froze stiff, some would thaw it with body heat by wrapping it inside their blankets. When boots split, they'd seal them with animal fat. One even used bear grease as both waterproofing and hair conditioner. Talk about multitasking. Then there were the debates, what to wear, what to eat, what to risk. Some swore by wool, others by buckskin. Wool stayed warm even when wet, but buckskin was lighter and quieter. Historians still argue which was better, though honestly, neither felt great when you hadn't bathed in a week. And food, forget it. The wilderness didn't cater to picky eaters. You'd eat anything with calories, jerked meat, dried berries, hardtack, or whatever unlucky creature wandered too close. There's a grimly funny journal entry from a frontier soldier in 1812 who described eating his moccasins, boiled twice and blessed once. It sounds ridiculous, but it probably saved his life. You shift closer to the fire, feeling the ground's chill creeping upward through your boots. It's easy to romanticize these people, to imagine them as rugged heroes. But survival stripped away the poetry. They weren't trying to be legends, they were just trying not to die before sunrise. There's another survival skill, less talked about but equally vital: listening. The forest changes tone at night. When the crickets stop, when the owl cuts off mid-call, something's moving. The frontiersman could tell predator from prey, friend from stranger, just by how the silence rearranged itself. You listen now. The forest hums steadily, good sign. But the occasional rustle reminds you that comfort is relative out here. You're never alone, not really. Somewhere beyond the light's edge, eyes blink. Probably a raccoon. Probably. You take a slow breath and remember another trick. How to use smell as warning. Fire smoke masks human scent. That's why they'd keep a small, smoldering stick near the shelter entrance. Some even rubbed ash into their clothes to hide from predators. Or worse, other people. A strange thought surfaces: how much of survival is just becoming invisible. Every tool, every habit, every silence, they all serve to erase your presence. You're there but unseen, breathing but unnoticed. It's eerie and beautiful all at once. The flames flicker lower now. You feed it a few more sticks and lean back against your makeshift bedding. Dried pine needles layered over spruce boughs. Soft enough for one night. You picture those long ago wanderers doing the same, half asleep, one hand resting on a rifle or knife, just in case. And yet, despite the hardship, many of them wrote that they'd never felt freer. Out here, everything you needed came from the land, and everything you lost could be earned back with effort. No bosses, no noise, no walls. Just you and the endless conversation between man and nature. You look up. The stars feel close enough to touch, sharp and clear against the ink-black sky. You trace the constellations like they did, the Big Dipper for North Orion for winter. You realize they were the original GPS, those silent points of light. Reliable, eternal, you yawn, the kind that seems to pull the weight of the day out of your chest. The forest breathes with you, soft, steady, ancient. Maybe tomorrow you'll track the deer again, or maybe you'll just walk. Either way, the lesson holds: survival isn't about brute strength. It's about knowing what to trust, fire, instinct, and the quiet that tells you you're still alive. You close your eyes, one hand near the fire, and think about those who came before. They'd probably laugh at how much gear we carry now: stoves, filters, sleeping bags that could survive Antarctica. All they had were wits, calloused hands, and a respect for the land that we've mostly forgotten. The fire pops. Somewhere an owl hoots twice. The sound rolls through the trees like a lullaby, slow and deliberate. You feel your heartbeat sensing with it calm content. You're not a frontiersman. But for tonight, in this moment, with the scent of smoke on your clothes and the stars whispering above, you almost understand what kept them alive. Not luck. Not brute strength. Just humility, the rarest survival skill of all. Morning doesn't so much arrive out here. It seeps in. The black fades to navy, then gray, then the thin gold edge of light starts bleeding through the branches. You wake to frost on your blanket and the faint crackle of dying embers. The forest, once menacing, feels quiet again, like it's letting you stay another day. You stretch, bones popping, and take a moment to watch your breath hang in the air. Survival always begins with the simple miracle that you're still breathing. And as the light sharpens, your next task looms, the one that separates the living from the lost. Navigation. Frontiersmen didn't have compasses half the time, and even when they did, iron deposits in the soil could throw the needle off. So they relied on older methods, instinct, observation, and a handful of tricks that made the wilderness readable. You take a slow breath, scanning the forest. Time to see if you can do the same. The first rule was easy to remember: the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But that's only helpful if you can see it. In dense forests, sunlight filters through leaves like liquid gold, and it's hard to tell direction from beauty alone. That's when they used the shadow stick method. You find a twig, push it into the dirt, and mark the tip of its shadow with a pebble. After 15 minutes, you mark it again. Draw a line between those two marks, and you've got your east-west line. Simple, foolproof, elegant. You imagine a trapper doing this at dawn, probably muttering to himself about how long it takes for the sun to move. There's a fascinating, lesser-known method too, using tree moss. You've probably heard that moss grows on the north side of trees, right? Well, sort of. Historians still argue whether that's reliable. Turns out moss just prefers shade and moisture, which usually means north in the northern hemisphere. But if you're near water or in thick fog, it'll grow anywhere it pleases. Nature has a sense of humor like that. You brush your hand over a patch of moss anyway, cool, damp, emerald green. It's not perfect science, but it gives you a hint. You face east, or what you think is east, and start walking. The sound of your boots crunching frost becomes a rhythm, steady and meditative. There's another frontier navigation trick that feels almost mystical: watching animal trails. Deer and elk always take the easiest route toward water and food. Follow them long enough, and you'll usually find a stream or meadow. Frontiersmen called this reading the land. It wasn't just tracking, it was empathy in motion. Seeing the world through another creature's choices. You find yourself following one such path now. A faint indentation winding downhill, bordered by pressed ferns. The air smells faintly metallic, promising water nearby. You smile. The old instincts still hold. But navigation wasn't just about direction. It was about memory. Without maps, frontiersmen had to record the landscape in their minds. The bend of a river, the shape of a hill, the way certain trees leaned toward sunlight. They'd leave signs, behind bent saplings pointing the way, carved marks on bark, stacked stones. You stop and look around. A fallen branch could serve as a marker. You wedge it upright between roots, a tiny act of communication for your future self. That's what these men did. Talk to their tomorrows through symbols in the earth. There's one quirky story from the journals of Lewis and Clark. They wrote about using buffalo skulls as direction markers across the plains. Skulls facing the route home. Creepy, absolutely. Practical, undeniably. Imagine cresting a hill and seeing a row of hollow-eyed bison heads staring back, silently saying, "This way, partner." Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or just a one-off experiment. But it's the kind of ingenuity that defines the frontier. Half madness, half brilliance. As the sun climbs higher, you reach a stream, its surface glinting like broken glass. You crouch, cupping icy water into your hands. It tastes metallic, wild, alive. Frontiersmen often followed water not just for drinking but for navigation. It always leads somewhere. Downstream meant civilization, upstream meant solitude. You glance in both directions and choose upstream. Not because it's safer, but because it feels right. The water murmurs beside you as you walk, and soon the trees thin just enough for the wind to move freely. You can hear it sing against the pine needles, a constant, directional whisper. That was another trick, listening to wind patterns. It usually followed terrain, curving through valleys or rushing over ridges. A good woodsman could tell the lay of the land from the way air moved against his ears. It's strange, isn't it? The idea that you could hear your way out of the wilderness. But you can. Even now, if you close your eyes and listen, you can tell whether you're near open ground or dense growth. The difference is subtle but real. You find yourself thinking about the loneliness of it all. How many men wandered like this for weeks, maybe months, with no human voice to guide them? Just trees, sky, and instinct. They'd hum to themselves sometimes, or talk to their rifles, or carve faces into sticks just to feel less alone. It sounds tragic, but maybe it was the only way to stay sane. You come across an old stump scarred with deep cuts. Someone once used it as a chopping block long ago. You touch the grooves and feel a weird kind of comfort. Proof that someone else walked this same way and survived. That's the frontier equivalent of a text message from the past. You keep walking until the trees open into a meadow. The grass bends under frost, and sunlight spills across it like honey. You can see far now, rolling hills, a sliver of mountains beyond, and maybe the faintest wisp of smoke. A camp, or just morning mist. Hard to tell. You crouch low, remembering the old rule: smoke means fire, and fire means someone. Could be friend, could be foe. Most frontiersmen approached cautiously, circling downwind to catch scent or sound first. They said you could smell coffee or bacon a mile off if the breeze was right. And nothing made a starving man braver than that smell. You chuckle quietly, imagining yourself creeping through grass, chasing the phantom scent of breakfast. Some things never change. Still, this was where navigation turned from science to art. Because beyond landmarks and instincts, there was trust, the faith that the land itself wouldn't betray you. And somehow, it rarely did. A ridge would lead to a valley, a stream to a river to a settlement. One journal entry from 1795 describes a lost trapper who followed a raven for 2 days, believing the bird was guiding him to safety. Ridiculous, right? Except it worked. The raven led him to a clearing where he found an old camp and supplies. Historians still argue whether that was divine luck or clever storytelling, but either way, it kept him alive. You tilt your head back, following a bird's flight now. It wheels toward the mountains, its wings flashing silver in the sun. Maybe instinct isn't just animal. Maybe it's something older, something baked into all of us. The compass you can't lose, even when everything else is gone. By noon, you've built a rough map in your head. The stream bends westward, the ridge runs north, and that distant plume of smoke still hangs on the horizon. You mark it mentally. You could reach it by nightfall if you wanted to. But there's something peaceful about staying lost for a while. Maybe that's the final lesson the frontiersmen learned. The wilderness doesn't owe you direction. You earn it by walking, by trusting your senses, by being humble enough to admit you don't always know the way. The meadow hums softly. A breeze passes through the tall grass, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. You adjust your pack, step forward, and let the land decide where you go next. Because out here, you realize navigation isn't about finding your way home. It's about finding your way back to yourself. By afternoon, the light has softened to a copper glow. You've been walking for hours, and the rhythm of your steps feels automatic now. Heel, toe, breathe, repeat. The land unfolds like a story told in slow motion: the curve of hills, the hush of wind through tall grass, the flicker of wings from a startled bird. Every inch of it holds a kind of quiet defiance, as if the wilderness itself remembers how many have tried and failed to tame it. That's when you start thinking about the tools that made taming it possible, or at least survivable. Because for all their courage and cunning, the frontiersmen's true lifeline came down to what they could carry on their backs. Their gear was simple, rugged, and often improvised from scraps. You run your fingers along your pack strap and imagine what they might have carried centuries ago. A knife was first. Always the knife. It wasn't just a weapon. It was life condensed into a few inches of steel. It built fires, skinned game, carved traps, and sometimes, in the darkest moments, cut through despair itself. Some men even named theirs like loyal companions. You can almost hear one whispering to his blade, "Don't fail me now." Historians still argue whether the famed Bowie knife was the ultimate frontier tool, or just a showpiece for duels and legends. What's certain is that most men preferred something smaller, light, sharp, and reliable. You picture one glinting in firelight, its handle worn smooth by use. Next came the rifle. Flintlock, percussion cap, or later, lever action. It didn't matter much. What mattered was that it fired when it needed to. The frontier didn't forgive misfires. Cleaning a gun was as ritualistic as prayer, oiling the barrel, checking the flint, loading powder and ball, all done with a reverence that bordered on superstition. You pause on the trail, imagining that quiet click of a ramrod seating a charge, the faint sulfur scent of black powder, the way your heart would race at the thought of missing your shot. Out here, one mistake could mean going hungry for days. Then there were traps, small, cruel, ingenious devices that turned patience into dinner. Steel spring traps, deadfall snares of sinew or vine. Frontiersmen could weave a rabbit snare blindfolded. One quirky method involved using a bent sapling and a trigger stick. Simple physics, devastating efficiency. It's said that experienced trappers could set a dozen before sunrise, each one a silent gamble with fate. Of course, not everything they carried was lethal. There were other essentials: a flint and steel, a tin cup, a whetstone, and, believe it or not, a sewing kit. Because when your life depended on your clothes, every rip mattered. Some even carried needles made from fish bones and thread pulled from animal sinew. You grin at the thought. Imagine explaining that to someone today. "Sorry, can't come to dinner. I'm stitching my deer hide pants. And then there was rope, always rope. Braided from hemp, rawhide, or twisted plant fiber, it was as versatile as imagination allowed. It hauled game, tied shelters, served as belt or bandage. There's a story, half legend, half truth, about a man who escaped a flood by using his rope as both raft tether and fishing line. When they found him 3 days later, soaked and delirious, he said, "That rope's worth more than my horse." You believe it. But beyond tools, there was something subtler that kept these people alive: craftsmanship. They knew how to fix everything they owned because they couldn't afford to lose anything. Buckles, barrels, buttons, boots. Everything was maintained, repurposed, recycled. Waste wasn't just frowned upon, it was suicidal. That mindset feels foreign now, doesn't it? We live in a world of replacements. They lived in a world of repairs. You take a break under a pine, pulling out your water flask. It's half empty, and you sip sparingly. The frontiersmen had their own ways of carrying water, often in hollow gourds or animal bladders. Some even fashioned canteens from tree bark, sealing the seams with pitch. Primitive, sure, but functional. There's a quirky detail from an 1827 expedition journal where a trapper wrote about using a buffalo horn as both drinking cup and trumpet. "It holds water by day," he wrote, "and scares off coyotes by night." You can't help but laugh quietly. Dual-purpose innovation at its finest. Still, the most impressive tool wasn't something they carried, it was something they made. The bow drill fire starter. It's a humble contraption, a spindle, a bow, and a socket. Spin the spindle fast enough and friction brings flame. It sounds simple until you try it. Imagine kneeling in the freezing dark, hands blistering, breath shaking, praying for smoke. And when it finally comes, a thin wisp curling upward. You understand why early settlers wrote about fire as if it were divine. Historians still debate whether most frontiersmen actually used bow drills regularly, or if that was more of a last resort method. Either way, the symbolism holds. Mastery of fire meant mastery of life. You toss a stick into the grass as you walk, half listening to the echo of the old frontier rule: chary little, know much. That was the key. Every tool was multi-purpose, every movement intentional. They didn't have gadgets, they had ingenuity. Take the simple hand axe, for example. Not just for chopping wood, it doubled as hammer, wedge, cooking spatula, even mirror if polished enough. One trapper claimed to have used his as a shaving blade in a pinch. You imagine that scene: rough hands, morning frost. One slip away from disaster, and you can't decide if it's bravery or insanity. But beneath the jokes, there's something admirable in that simplicity. These tools weren't extensions of power, they were extensions of understanding. Each one required skill, and skill demanded patience. You think about your own life for a moment, how convenience has replaced creativity, how knowledge feels outsourced to machines. The frontiersmen couldn't Google how to tie a snare. They learned by doing, failing, freezing, trying again. The wilderness didn't teach through mercy, it taught through repetition. The sun dips lower, brushing the horizon with orange fire. You feel a tug of melancholy, an awareness that all this knowledge, this practical wisdom, is slipping away. Forgotten, like so many footprints in the dirt. You reach into your bag and pull out your modern lighter. One click, one flame. Effortless. And yet, it feels almost disrespectful to the ghosts of those who spun coals from wood and braith. You let the flame burn for a second, then snuff it out. The faint smell of fuel mixes with pine, oddly artificial against the wild air. Somewhere a memory surfaces of an old survival saying, "A man's worth is measured by how long he can live after everything breaks." You smile softly. Maybe that's why the frontiersmen still fascinate us. Not because they conquered nature, but because they coexisted with it, stubbornly, skillfully, and sometimes beautifully. You sling your pack over your shoulder and keep walking as dusk settles. The world turns indigo, shadows pooling in the hollows. Every tool, every habit, every scrap of knowledge you've imagined tonight feels heavier in your thoughts. Out here, nothing separates survival from failure except the will to adapt, and the hands to shape whatever's left. So you keep your knife close, your eyes open, and your respect sharper than your blade. Because somewhere between the echoes of their footsteps and the whisper of your own, you realize the truth those frontiersmen always knew: you don't need much to survive. Just the right things, and the courage to use them well. Night has settled over the wilderness like a heavy cloak. The stars are so sharp they look almost dangerous, slicing through the black sky with quiet authority. You tilt your head back, and for a moment, it feels like you're falling upward into them. Endless, cold, magnificent. There are no city lights here to dim their glow, no noise but the low rustle of trees breathing and the steady pulse of your heart. You build a small fire in a hollow between rocks, watching the flame catch, then crawl, then dance. It's a humble little thing, but to a frontiersman, it was life's greatest luxury. Fire meant warmth, safety, and light, a fragile bubble of control in an ocean of uncertainty. They treated it with reverence. To them, flame wasn't a tool, it was a companion. You imagine what nights must have felt like for those early wanderers. No tent walls, no electricity, just open dark and the soft crunch of something unseen moving nearby. They'd sit close to the fire, hands outstretched, listening to the wood hiss and crackle like it was whispering secrets. Some wrote in their journals that the sound of burning pine was the only sermon a lonely man needs. The fire makes you think of cooking, or, more accurately, the struggle to cook anything out here. The frontier diet was brutally practical. You ate what you caught, or you didn't eat at all. Game meat, hardtack, dried beans, a little coffee if luck was kind. Salt was a treasure, sugar a miracle. There's a journal entry from a trapper in 1811 who wrote, 3 weeks without salt, and I would have traded my rifle for a pinch. You believe him. You stare into the flames and picture one of those camps, a skillet blackened from years of use, a slab of venison hissing in the fat, the smell both heavenly and faintly desperate. They didn't season for flavor, they seasoned for survival. Every scrap mattered. If the meat spoiled, they boiled it. If it burned, they ate it anyway. Hunger doesn't leave room for pride. Sometimes they'd mix ground grain with river water to make a kind of crude pancake. It tasted like wet bark, apparently, but it filled the belly. Others roasted pine nuts or chewed dried roots for the illusion of food. One explorer described a meal of leather straps softened in boiling water. He called it a supper for those with nothing left but will. But still, there were rare moments of comfort. Coffee, bitter black, and boiled beyond recognition, was the sacred elixir of the frontier. It kept men awake on cold nights, gave them courage in the morning, and sometimes stopped fights around the fire. You can almost smell it now, mingling with smoke and damp earth. There's a strange intimacy in the way people wrote about those nights. Even the toughest frontiersmen turned poetic when the firelight flickered across their faces. Loneliness, one said, is louder in the woods than thunder. Another wrote that he talked to his rifle like a friend. Some sang to the stars. A few went mad. You feel the weight of that silence yourself. It's a kind of beauty that hurts. The awareness that you are completely surrounded by a living world that doesn't know or care you exist. It's humbling, terrifying, and oddly peaceful. The more you sit there, the more you begin to understand something that modern life rarely teaches. The wilderness doesn't want you dead. It simply doesn't care if you live. Survival isn't a battle against nature, it's a negotiation with it. You glance at the small tin cup near the fire, your only luxury tonight. The reflection of the flame shivers on its surface like liquid gold. The old trappers carried theirs everywhere, hooked to their belts or hanging from a leather thong. It wasn't just for drinking, it was a measuring tool, a scoop, sometimes even a weapon. There's a legend about a man who killed a snake with his tin cup and then used the same cup to drink the snake's broth. You can't decide if that's horrifying or brilliant. Above the fire, you rig a simple tripod of sticks, balancing a pan over the coals. The scent of smoke and charred metal reminds you that every frontiersman was, by necessity, part cook, part blacksmith, part philosopher. Out here, titles didn't matter, only usefulness did. There's another odd comfort in that. The frontier didn't care who you were back east, rich man, runaway, outlaw, preacher. It erased you and rewrote you in its own language. Dirt and hunger were equalizers. You became what you could do, not what you owned. You poke the fire with a stick, and the sparks leap like tiny souls into the night air. For a fleeting moment, you imagine them as memories. Fragments of every man and woman who ever sat by a similar flame. Their stories swirl invisibly around you, whispers of love, loss, hunger, laughter, and frostbite. And you realize something quietly profound. The frontier was not just a physical place. It was a mindset, a test, a mirror. It stripped you down to your truest self. Out here, you couldn't lie to the land or to yourself. You either endured or you didn't. You either learned to listen or the silence swallowed you whole. The night deepens. Somewhere far off, a wolf howls, long, mournful, and perfect. It doesn't sound threatening. It sounds eternal. You understand suddenly why those early wanderers gave such reverence to the sound. It reminded them that they weren't alone, not entirely. There was life everywhere, even if unseen. You lean back, hands behind your head, and let the sound wash through you. The fire pops once, startling a nearby bird into the dark. A cool wind snakes through the clearing, stirring the embers into a slow, glowing heartbeat. It occurs to you then that the frontiersmen didn't just survive nights like this. They belonged to them. This was their cathedral, their tavern, their refuge. The fire wasn't just for warmth, it was a tether to sanity. There's an entry from a woman pioneer dated 1846 that lingers in your mind. She wrote, "We are never so close to God as when the fire burns low and the stars lean down to listen." You think about that for a long while. The world today feels louder, more crowded, and somehow lonelier. Maybe that's why stories of the frontier still haunt us. Because they remind us of something we've forgotten, how to be small in a vast world and still feel whole. You lie down near the embers, wrapping your blanket tight. The air is cold enough to bite. Somewhere in the distance, water murmurs over stones, the eternal lullaby of those who walked this land long before roads and fences. As sleep pulls at your eyelids, one last thought flickers like dying flame. The frontier wasn't conquered, it was endured. And maybe, deep down, every one of us is still trying to survive our own version of it. Morning arrives slow, like a reluctant confession. The air tastes like ash and cold dew, and for a brief moment, you forget where you are. Then the sound of a crackling fire reminds you. The frontier doesn't pause for confusion. You stretch, bones creaking, and watch the faint trail of smoke rise and disappear into a pale sky. The wilderness always demanded community, even when it looked like solitude. No frontiersman truly survived alone for long. Out here, trust wasn't a luxury, it was a form of currency. Without it, you didn't last the winter. And yet, the strange paradox was that trust had to be earned in a world built on caution. You picture two travelers meeting on a dirt trail, miles from anything resembling civilization. Both watch each other from a distance, hands hovering near their belts. A single nod, not too quick, not too friendly, would decide whether they shared fire that night or went their separate ways. That nod meant everything. Historians still argue whether the so-called frontier code was formalized or simply instinctual, but it's clear that a silent etiquette existed. Unspoken laws that kept people alive. You never walked into another man's camp uninvited. You always announced yourself before approaching, even if just by coughing or snapping a twig loud enough to be heard. If he didn't look up, that was your sign to leave. If he did, and the corner of his mouth turned slightly upward, you were welcome to the fire. You sit beside your own little flame now, imagining that moment, two strangers meeting not as enemies, but as fellow survivors. Maybe they shared jerky, maybe a story, maybe a single night of rest before parting ways forever. The frontier wasn't sentimental. Friendships were as transient as the smoke that drifted between camps. Still, those connections mattered. They built invisible trails between hearts long before roads were drawn on maps. A man could travel for weeks and stumble into a settlement where someone recognized his name. "You're the one who helped Wilson's boy near the river," they'd say. Word traveled faster than feet, carried by rumor and respect. Frontier trust was layered like bark. Thin at the surface, thicker the longer it grew. You didn't ask a man's past, but you learned everything from how he built his fire, how he cleaned his rifle, how he treated his horse. Character was survival, and reputation was the only insurance you had. You can almost feel that tension in your chest. The way every encounter held risk. Was the next rider an ally or a thief? Would he share braid or bullets? A careless handshake could end in an empty saddle. No wonder people developed their own codes. Carved symbols on trees, bent twigs and stacked stones that spoke a secret language of trust. These were the campfire codes, the emojis of another century. A circle of stones left near a trail might mean safe water ahead. A broken branch pointing left could signal danger that way. Even fire smoke was used to communicate. One steady column meant peace, two short bursts meant distress. You wonder how many modern hikers pass those same forests now, never realizing the stories still etched in the landscape, the quiet marks of men and women who survived through subtlety. There's something poetic about that. Trust, in the frontier sense, wasn't about blind faith. It was about reading signs, respecting silence, and understanding that your survival often depended on the decency of someone you barely knew. You kick at a pine cone and think of the lonely nights when that trust meant everything. Imagine wandering for days, sick and starving, until a faint glow appears in the distance. You approach cautiously, hoping not to get shot. Then a voice from the shadows says, "Come warm yourself." That single phrase could feel like salvation. Of course, not all encounters were kind. There were betrayals, ambushes, and thefts that hardened even the gentlest souls. One trapper wrote, "The fire of man's heart burns hot until hunger puts it out." Yet another journal, from a woman who traveled west in 1839, records the opposite. A stranger who carried her sick son 10 miles to safety and refused reward. The frontier had a brutal balance. For every story of cruelty, there was one of unexpected grace. You stir the coals absently, remembering how frontiersmen could judge a companion by how they handled a shared fire. A man who took the best spot or burned too much wood wasn't worth trusting. The one who quietly kept the flame steady. That was someone you'd follow into the wilderness. Modern life has made trust almost too easy. Clicks, follows, instant messages. But back then it was physical, sacred, and fragile. You earned it with sweat and silence. There's an old saying, "The fire never lies." On the frontier, that was gospel. When someone sat by your fire, they were illuminated. Every scar, every twitch, every truth laid bare by the light. Lies thrived in daylight towns, not in the wilderness. As you picture that flickering warmth, you realize why the campfire became a kind of confessional. Out there, under stars older than language, people told the truth, or at least, as close to it as they dared. They shared memories of home, regrets, dreams, and the quiet fear that they'd never see another sunrise. These were stories that dissolved into the smoke, never recorded but somehow eternal. You imagine one such night, a half moon hanging low, a pair of travelers passing a flask, laughter cracking through exhaustion. One says, "If we make it through winter, I'm building a cabin." The other smirks. "If we make it through winter, I'm never leaving it." Both know they're lying. The frontier changes you. Once you've lived by instinct, ordinary walls feel like cages. The fire pops again, and you smile faintly at the thought. You start to see the pattern. Survival wasn't just about skill, but about connection. Every tool, every trick, every whispered legend came from someone helping someone else stay alive. There's a fringe theory, part folklore, part wishful thinking, that frontiersmen left not only physical codes but emotional ones. That a kindness given in the wild somehow rippled through the land, ensuring the giver would receive help someday from a stranger. The woods remember good deeds, one saying went. Historians still argue whether that belief was faith or superstition. But maybe, in a place where death was a daily neighbor, it made sense to believe the wilderness kept score. You stretch your hands toward the fire, feeling its warmth seep into your skin. The flames twist and bend, casting shapes that look almost human. Maybe, in some strange way, they are the ghosts of every fire that's ever burned in this vast, indifferent land. And you think, maybe that's the secret the frontiersmen understood better than us. That survival isn't just about staying alive, but about staying human while you do it. A breeze picks up, scattering sparks into the night. You let out a breath that feels older than words. Tomorrow will bring another challenge. But for tonight, you sit in the circle of trust, fragile, glowing, eternal, and let the wild listen back. Morning arrives slow, like a reluctant confession. The air tastes like ash and cold dew, and for a brief moment you forget where you are. Then the sound of a crackling fire reminds you. The frontier doesn't pause for confusion. You stretch, bones creaking, and watch the faint trail of smoke rise and disappear into a pale sky. The wilderness always demanded community, even when it looked like solitude. No frontiersman truly survived alone for long. Out here, trust wasn't a luxury. It was a form of currency. Without it, you didn't last the winter. And yet, the strange paradox was that trust had to be earned in a world built on caution. You picture two travelers meeting on a dirt trail, miles from anything resembling civilization. Both watch each other from a distance, hands hovering near their belts. A single nod, not too quick, not too friendly, would decide whether they shared fire that night or went their separate ways. That nod meant everything. Historians still argue whether the so-called frontier code was formalized or simply instinctual, but it's clear that a silent etiquette existed. Unspoken laws that kept people alive. You never walked into another man's camp uninvited. You always announced yourself before approaching, even if just by coughing or snapping a twig loud enough to be heard. If he didn't look up, that was your sign to leave. If he did, and the corner of his mouth turned slightly upward, you were welcome to the fire. You sit beside your own little flame now, imagining that moment, two strangers meeting not as enemies but as fellow survivors. Maybe they shared jerky, maybe a story, maybe a single night of rest before parting ways forever. The frontier wasn't sentimental. Friendships were as transient as the smoke that drifted between camps. Still, those connections mattered. They built invisible trails between hearts long before roads were drawn on maps. A man could travel for weeks and stumble into a settlement where someone recognized his name. "You're the one who helped Wilson's boy near the river." They'd say, word traveled faster than feet, carried by rumor and respect. Frontier trust was layered like bark, thin at the surface, thicker the longer it grew. You didn't ask a man's past, but you learned everything from how he built his fire, how he cleaned his rifle, how he treated his horse. Character was survival, and reputation was the only insurance you had. You can almost feel that tension in your chest. The way every encounter held risk. Was the next rider an ally or a thief? Would he share bread or bullets? A careless handshake could end in an empty saddle. No wonder people developed their own codes. Carved symbols on trees, bent twigs, and stacked stones that spoke a secret language of trust. These were the campfire codes, the emojis of another century. A circle of stones left near a trail might mean safe water ahead. A broken branch pointing left could signal danger that way. Even fire smoke was used to communicate. One steady column meant peace, two short bursts meant distress. You wonder how many modern hikers pass those same forests now, never realizing the stories still etched in the landscape. The quiet marks of men and women who survived through subtlety. There's something poetic about that. Trust, in the frontier sense, wasn't about blind faith. It was about reading signs, respecting silence, and understanding that your survival often depended on the decency of someone you barely knew. You kick at a pine cone and think of the lonely nights when that trust meant everything. Imagine wandering for days, sick and starving, until a faint glow appears in the distance. You approach cautiously, hoping not to get shot. Then a voice from the shadows says, "Come warm yourself." That single phrase could feel like salvation. Of course, not all encounters were kind. There were betrayals, ambushes, and thefts that hardened even the gentlest souls. One trapper wrote, "The fire of man's heart burns hot until hunger puts it out." Yet another journal, from a woman who traveled west in 1839, records the opposite. A stranger who carried her sick son 10 miles to safety and refused reward. The frontier had a brutal balance. For every story of cruelty, there was one of unexpected grace. You stir the coals absently, remembering how frontiersmen could judge a companion by how they handled a shared fire. A man who took the best spot, or burned too much wood, wasn't worth trusting. The one who quietly kept the flame steady. That was someone you'd follow into the wilderness. Modern life has made trust almost too easy. Clicks, follows, instant messages. But back then it was physical, sacred, and fragile. You earned it with sweat and silence. There's an old saying, the fire never lies. On the frontier, that was gospel. When someone sat by your fire, they were illuminated. Every scar, every twitch, every truth laid bare by the light. Lies thrived in daylight towns, not in the wilderness. As you picture that flickering warmth, you realize why the campfire became a kind of confessional. Out there under stars older than language, people told the truth, or at least, as close to it as they dared. They shared memories of home, regrets, dreams, and the quiet fear that they'd never see another sunrise. These were stories that dissolved into the smoke, never recorded but somehow eternal. You imagine one such night, a half-moon hanging low, a pair of travelers passing a flask, laughter cracking through exhaustion. One says, "If we make it through winter, I'm building a cabin." The other smirks. "If we make it through winter, I'm never leaving it." Both know they're lying. The frontier changes you. Once you've lived by instinct, ordinary walls feel like cages. The fire pops again, and you smile faintly at the thought. You start to see the pattern. Survival wasn't just about skill, but about connection. Every tool, every trick, every whispered legend came from someone helping someone else stay alive. There's a fringe theory, part folklore, part wishful thinking, that frontiersmen left not only physical codes but emotional ones. That a kindness given in the wild somehow rippled through the land, ensuring the giver would receive help someday from a stranger. The woods remember good deeds, one saying went. Historians still argue whether that belief was faith or superstition. But maybe, in a place where death was a daily neighbor, it made sense to believe the wilderness kept score. You stretch your hands toward the fire, feeling its warmth seep into your skin. The flames twist and bend, casting shapes that look almost human. Maybe, in some strange way they are, the ghosts of every fire that's ever burned in this vast, indifferent land. And you think, maybe that's the secret the frontiersmen understood better than us. That survival isn't just about staying alive, but about staying human while you do it. A breeze picks up, scattering sparks into the night. You let out a breath that feels older than words. Tomorrow will bring another challenge. But for tonight, you sit in the circle of trust, fragile, glowing, eternal, and let the wild listen back. The next morning, the world feels still. You wake to the rhythm of dripping dew and the sigh of trees shaking off last night's dreams. Your fire has died down to faint orange ghosts, and a thin ribbon of smoke twists into the waking air. You stretch, wipe the grit from your eyes, and realize, if you didn't know which way to go, this is where the real test of survival began. Navigation without instruments wasn't just a skill on the frontier. It was an act of faith. You didn't need a compass when you could read the earth like a storybook. And out here, the story was written everywhere. In shadows, moss, stars, wind, and the soft whisper of rivers. You shoulder your pack and begin walking. The forest hums, alive but watchful. Every step has weight. You remember what one old woodsman once wrote. The land will tell you where you are, if you shut up long enough to listen. That's the first rule, quiet. The second, observation. The frontiersmen knew the difference between a north-facing slope and a south-facing one just by how the plants grew. The north side of trees stayed darker, damper, coated in moss, while the south side reached greedily toward the sun. Moss, they said, was nature's compass. But here's the catch, moss lies sometimes. Historians still argue whether moss really grows only on the north, or if it simply prefers shade. The smart frontiersmen didn't rely on a single clue. They built patterns in their minds, layers of evidence, not hunches. You test that wisdom now, tracing your fingers over the bark of a pine. The rough side faces east. The morning sun's bite. You squint at the shadows, long and clean, pointing westward. It feels almost supernatural, this way of reading invisible geometry. Some learned from the stars. The Big Dipper, for example, was more than poetry. It was survival. 2 stars at the end of the bowl, pointed straight to Polaris, the North Star, steady and faithful even when everything else shifted. If you could find that, you could find your direction home. But there were nights when clouds swallowed the sky, and even the bravest travelers lost their bearings. On those nights, they turned to instinct, to rivers that tended to flow toward known valleys, to animal tracks that often led to water, to the way winds shaped the grass. You begin to understand. Navigation wasn't just knowledge, it was relationship. You had to know the land, not just look at it. And then there was the sun, the frontier's oldest clock. You could estimate direction by holding your hand horizontally at arm's length, each finger roughly representing 15 minutes of daylight between the sun and horizon. You smile at the simplicity of it. No gadgets, no batteries, just flesh and light. Still, mistakes could be deadly. There's a record from 1823 of two trappers who wandered in circles for days, convinced they were heading south while actually drifting northwest. When they finally reached safety, one said, "We trusted the wrong gut." That line stuck with you, because gut instinct on the frontier was both savior and betrayer. You stop by a clearing now, watching a hawk spiral overhead. The direction it turns in might reveal wind patterns. The scent of pine grows thicker, a hint you're nearing higher ground. Every sense sharpens. The earth itself becomes your map. Frontiersmen carried few possessions, but among the most precious were memory maps, mental sketches of rivers, mountains, and stars. Some would carve landmarks into sticks or scratch symbols into their rifles. One old journal describes a man who tied knots into a cord to count valleys crossed. A primitive GPS, powered by patience. You kneel and trace lines in the dirt, imagining the trails of those before you. Endless footsteps, always forward, always searching. The wilderness didn't forgive those who walked without awareness. You couldn't just wander, you had to interpret. Historians still debate how much of frontier navigation was science and how much was mysticism. Some swore by logic. Others claimed dreams led them home. There are stories of travelers waking suddenly in the night with an overwhelming sense to turn east, only to find salvation hours later. Coincidence, or some deep, ancient link between human instinct and the land itself. You can't help but wonder as you walk. By midday, the forest opens into a valley. The sunlight feels different here, warmer, wider. You follow the wind, it carries a faint smell of water. Sure enough, minutes later you hear it, the low murmur of a stream. You grin. You're not lost. But navigation wasn't just about direction. It was also about awareness of place. Frontiersmen often described the feeling of knowing exactly where they stood even without coordinates. A sense of rightness. The land taught them humility and intuition. They learned to notice everything, the tilt of a shadow, the shape of clouds, even the language of birds. When birds went silent, something big was near, storm, predator, or stranger. You pause again. The forest is noisy, that's good. You're still alone. One fringe tidbit from an old trapper's diary claimed that ravens always flew along invisible lines of energy, leading the observant to shelter or game. No science has ever proven that, of course, but out here, superstition often filled the gaps that logic couldn't. You move again, your shadow growing shorter as the sun rises higher. It's strange how deeply human this all feels. The need to know where you are, the desire to move towards something familiar. Maybe navigation isn't about finding your way through the world, but about finding your place in it. By late afternoon, you stop atop a small ridge. Below, the world stretches out in folds of green and gold, threaded with rivers that flash like veins of silver. For a moment, you can almost see the ghosts of old frontiersmen moving through it. Small figures with big hearts, trusting themselves against impossible odds. One carries a compass with a broken needle. Another reads the stars like scripture. A third walks with nothing but memory and hope. And all of them, in their own way, find home. You sit there until the light softens and the first stars blink awake. You pick one, maybe Polaris, maybe not, and whisper a quiet thank you to whoever first looked up and said, "That's north." Somewhere behind you, a wolf howls again, low and distant. You smile. Even he knows the way. The morning begins with an uneasy silence, a heavy, suspended quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. You've been in the wilderness long enough to recognize it. The birds are gone. The air feels charged. Something is coming. You pull your coat tighter and look toward the horizon. Dark clouds roll in fast, too fast. The kind that don't drift but arrive. They build like mountains, swallowing sunlight, their edges bruised purple and silver. The wind shifts, bringing the faint metallic taste of rain and electricity. The frontiersmen feared nothing more than nature and rebellion. Outlaws could be fought, wolves could be scared off, hunger could be delayed. But storms, floods, the raw tantrum of the earth, those were reminders that humanity was just a brief visitor here. You crouch, gathering the remains of your campfire. A few glowing embers wink out like dying eyes. You've got minutes, maybe less. The first droplets strike the leaves. Fat, cold, deliberate. You sling your pack and start moving downslope, following instinct towards shelter. The frontiersmen always had a saying, high ground for sight, low ground for safety, unless it rains. Floods were the silent assassins of the frontier. The land could look calm one moment, and an hour later, a wall of water would come roaring through, tearing down everything in its path. There's a story about a trapper in 1827 who camped too close to a dry creek bed. He woke to thunder that wasn't thunder, a flash flood, sudden and merciless. They found his camp days later, miles downstream, his rifle still clutched in his hand. Historians still argue whether he ignored the warning signs or if the flood just came too fast. Either way, the message was clear: the frontier didn't need to hate you to kill you. You find a cluster of boulders and wedge yourself beneath a rocky overhang. The rain hits hard now, hammering the ground, turning soil to soup. Within minutes, small rivers form everywhere. The smell of ozone and mud fills your lungs. Lightning tears across the sky, so bright it paints the forest white for an instant. A flash photograph of chaos. You sit there, drenched but alive, and think of what those storms must have meant to the people who lived them, without the comfort of roofs or forecasts. There's a strange beauty in it. The sound of the world cleaning itself, the raw power that made every creature hide and wait. Some frontiersmen claimed to sense storms long before they arrived, a prickling behind the ears, a change in pressure, a taste in the air. Others said it was the animals who warned them. Horses grew restless, birds vanished, dogs whined. You realize now that every living thing on the frontier was a weather instrument if you paid attention. When the rain finally eases, you emerge cautiously. Everything glistens, the forest reborn in liquid silver. The sky, once a bruise, now glows faintly gold. But peace rarely lasted long out here. By nightfall, another kind of storm begins. The wind. It starts as a whisper, then a low moan through the trees. You tighten your coat again, feeling the temperature drop. Wind was the ghostly architect of the plains. It carved rock, uprooted trees, and turned small campfires into roaring infernos. More than one settlement vanished to fire whipped by prairie gusts. There's even an old report from Kansas, 1868, of a storm that burned 12 cabins to the ground in under an hour. The survivors said the air itself was on fire. You can almost hear it, that hollow, mournful howl that made even the toughest men shiver. They called it the devil's breath. And then came winter, the most ruthless storm of all. Frontiersmen didn't live through winter. They battled it bone by bone. You picture them now, huddled in log cabins, wrapped in animal hides, the air inside so cold their breath froze on the walls. Food dwindled, light faded early, and sometimes the silence became too heavy to bear. One pioneer diary from 1844 describes how they melted snow for drinking water until the pot cracked from frost. We heard the ice sing in the trees, the writer said, and thought it was angels calling us home. You can almost hear it yourself, that eerie sound of branches creaking under snow, a brittle music that fills the dark. Some nights, the cold was so deep that even the rivers froze solid. Yet the frontiersmen still found ways to survive. They lined their boots with dried grass, kept coals in metal tins under blankets, even slept with their rifles to keep the metal from freezing. One ingenious trick involved filling a pouch with hot sand and placing it near the chest. A primitive heating pad that saved countless lives. You huddle closer to your small fire, remembering those methods. The flicker of warmth feels almost sacred now. Historians still debate what killed more settlers, disease, hunger, or weather. The truth is, they worked together like conspirators. A flood ruined crops, a blizzard trapped families, and starvation crept quietly in. Yet somehow the human spirit persisted, patching roofs, mending clothes, and whispering prayers to a sky that didn't always listen. You think of one story in particular, a wagon party caught in a late spring snowstorm in the Rockies. They survived by digging into snowdrifts, creating small caves that trapped body heat. Days later, when rescue finally arrived, the rescuers found them alive, half frozen, but laughing. One man said, "We kept our fire in our hearts." That phrase lingers. You roll it around in your mind as the wind hums through the trees. Maybe that's what separated survival from surrender. The ability to find warmth in spirit when the world turned cold. As night deepens, you watch the firelight dance across the wet stones. Each spark feels like a rebellion against the darkness. The rain starts again, softer this time, almost musical. It taps against the leaves like an old lullaby. You close your eyes and listen. You imagine the thousands who once sat like you are now, wet, cold, exhausted, and alive. The storm was their teacher, their tormentor, and sometimes their only companion. And even though you're safe now, wrapped in a blanket beneath a rocky ledge, you can't help but feel small again. Beautifully, properly small. Because out here, no matter how clever or strong you are, you're just one heartbeat beneath an ancient sky that doesn't bend to anyone's will. You take a deep breath. The air is clean, sharp, and full of ghosts. The storm passes, the land sleeps again, and you, just a small figure beneath infinity, keep listening. When dawn arrives, it feels like the world is beginning again. The forest glistens with dew, every blade of grass jeweled in light. You rise from your makeshift shelter, sore and chilled, but strangely alive, as if the storm washed something clean inside you too. You follow the muddy trail downward, the smell of wet earth and pine thick in the air. The birds have returned, tentative at first, then louder, bolder. Their songs are proof that life always resumes, no matter how violently it pauses. But as you walk, you notice the damage. Fallen branches litter the path, small rivulets carve new channels through the soil, and a tree nearby smolders where lightning struck it in the night. You step closer, touching the blackened bark, still warm. The power that can split trees in half, ignite forests, and terrify armies was, to the frontiersmen, just another neighbor. Many of them wrote about lightning with awe. Some believed it was divine, God's fire sent to purify. Others saw it as the spirit of nature itself, unpredictable and wild. In journals and letters, you find drawings of charred trees and notes like, "Struck within 20 yards of our wagon, no soul harmed." A sign, perhaps, that we are watched. It's a haunting word out here. You remember stories of travelers who swore they weren't alone in the wilderness. Not because of people, but something else. The way the trees seemed to shift when the wind died. The sensation of eyes in the dark. Whether it was fear, isolation, or something more, it followed them. There's an account from 1819 written by a trapper named Elias Boone. He claimed that while hunting elk in the Colorado Territory, he felt presence that mirrored every movement, every breath. He thought it was another man. But when he called out, the echo answered a beat too late. He left the woods the next morning and never returned. The frontier was full of such stories, tales of shadowy watchers, strange lights, and whispers that rose with the wind. Most historians dismiss them as loneliness-induced hallucinations, but you can't help feeling that something about this land carries memory, as if every footstep, every struggle, every death leaves an echo that lingers. You keep walking, and soon the trees begin to thin. Beyond them lies open prairie, the grass still bending under the weight of rain. The landscape unfolds endlessly, rippling gold and green to the horizon. You step into the light, and suddenly you understand why so many risked everything to come here. Freedom. That was the true lure of the frontier. Not land, not riches, but the chance to exist without walls. Imagine it: no rulers, no neighbors, no roads. Just you and the earth, bound by survival. For some that was salvation. For others it was a slow unraveling. Many pioneers couldn't endure the silence. Days without voices, nights without walls. It changed them. Diaries mention prairie madness, a kind of creeping melancholy that stole language and reason. A woman on the Great Plains once wrote, "The wind speaks in my husband's voice now." That line chills you. The more you read, the more you realize that solitude, as much as any danger, was the frontier's cruelest test. The human mind isn't built for endless quiet. It starts inventing company. Some pioneers talk to their horses, others to the stars. A few claim to see figures walking beside them at dusk, loved ones long dead, or strangers who vanished into the mist. It's easy to dismiss it from your warm seat in history, but out there, days from another living soul. Imagination and fear blur until they're the same thing. You stop for a moment on the open plain, the wind threading through your hair. There's a stillness so vast it feels like standing inside a held breath. Then, far-off movement, a dark shape cresting a distant ridge. For an instant, your pulse jumps. Another traveler, a horse. No, just a shadow shifting with the clouds. That was how the mind betrayed itself here. It turned absence into ghosts. As you continue across the prairie, your thoughts drift to those who kept journals during their journeys. Their words, shaky, desperate, often written by candlelight, are the only bridges left to their minds. In their ink, you find humanity stripped bare: hope, despair, faith, hunger, madness, beauty. A settler named Rebecca Miles wrote from her wagon in 1852, "The land looks endless, and we are so small upon it. Sometimes I think God made it wide to test our courage." You pause, looking out over that same endlessness, and think she might have been right. Even now, centuries later, the land still humbles you. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine the pioneers as heroes. But when you read their words, you see the cracks, the fear, the doubt, the quiet longing for home that never truly left them. And maybe that's why their story matters. Because it wasn't about conquering nature. It was about learning to live beside it, to be small, and survive anyway. You walk for hours, following the ghost of an old wagon trail, faint grooves carved into the earth, still visible after all this time. It's strange how something as fragile as human will can outlast generations. When the sun begins to set, painting the sky in bruised orange and violet, you spot something in the distance, a small wooden cross half buried in grass. You approach slowly. The wood is weathered, almost fused with the soil. No name, no date, just a carved X and a rusted tin cup beside it. You crouch, brushing away dirt. Whoever lies here didn't make it far. Maybe they were part of a wagon train. Maybe they just lost their way. You feel a lump in your throat, a mix of grief and awe. Out here, a grave could be anywhere, and most were never marked at all. For a moment, you imagine them. A lone traveler, weak from hunger, leaving that cup behind as a final kindness to the next soul who might pass this way. It's a gesture so small, yet profoundly human. Even at the edge of survival, compassion found a way. You stand there until the last light fades, and the first stars prick through the deepening blue. The prairie hums softly, alive with unseen creatures. Then, in the vast silence, you whisper a simple promise. For them, for all who came before you are remembered. And the wind, always listening, carries it away. The night that follows feels endless. You lie awake under a heavy sky, the stars sharp and close enough to touch. The earth beneath you still radiates the faint warmth of the day, and the wind sighs through the grass like a tired breath. Somewhere out there, a coyote calls, one long, lonely note, and you realize how silence can be louder than any city ever was. That's when you start thinking about what it meant to be a frontiersman. Not just in body, but in mind. Because survival out here wasn't only about fire, food, or shelter. It was about something deeper, something woven into the bones of those who lasted. You imagine waking up every morning knowing that the day itself might try to kill you. Weather, wild animals, hunger, disease, it all blurred together into one simple question: how badly do you want to live? Frontiersmen didn't have motivational quotes or grind culture. Their discipline was quieter. It lived in their hands, their calloused palms, their frost-bitten knuckles. They moved because stopping meant dying. And yet there was peace in that simplicity. Every action mattered. Every mistake taught you immediately. There were no second chances, but also no pointless noise, no opinions, no deadlines, no internet to remind you how small your victories were. You picture yourself splitting logs at dawn, the rhythm steady, breath visible in the cold air. There's no audience, no reward but warmth. But that's enough. It's almost meditative. That, perhaps, was the frontier mindset, the ability to find meaning in the bare act of staying alive. Historians still argue whether this mindset came from necessity or philosophy. Some say it forged a new kind of American identity, rugged, independent, stubbornly hopeful. Others claim it broke people, hollowing them until they could no longer live among others. Maybe both are true. Take the story of Thomas Larkin, a trapper from the 1820s. He spent 7 years alone along the Snake River. When a rescue party finally found him, he could barely speak. He'd forgotten language, relying instead on gestures, sounds, and expressions. His journal, what remained of it, was filled with single words repeated like prayers: food, fire, safe home. You think about that, how isolation can strip you down to your essence. No pretenses, no small talk, just raw need and instinct. In a way it's terrifying, in another it's pure, but not everyone who ventured out here was seeking purity. Many ran from something: debt, the law, heartbreak, the ghosts of war. The wilderness became their confession booth. They believed, maybe foolishly, that freedom could erase the past. It didn't, of course. It only gave it room to echo. You come across a fragment of a diary in your mental wanderings, one from an unknown woman traveling west in 1847. It reads, "Out here, there is no yesterday. There is only the next fire, the next drink of water, the next breath. I miss the uselessness of safety." That line sticks with you. The uselessness of safety. Maybe she understood something we've forgotten. Comfort dulls the edges of existence, but danger sharpens it until every heartbeat feels deliberate. You think of modern life, how we chase stimulation because real stakes are gone. We fear discomfort, but the frontiersmen embraced it. They didn't call it discomfort. They called it Tuesday. One quirky detail often overlooked: many pioneers carried small keepsakes from home. A lock of hair, a page from a Bible, a single silver button. These tokens weren't practical, but they anchored them to civilization. A reminder that, even if they lived like ghosts, they were still human. You imagine reaching into your pocket and finding something like that. A little relic of your old life. Maybe a photograph, maybe a piece of string someone once tied around your wrist. It's funny how the smallest things can carry more weight than any weapon. There was also humor even out here. Journal entries mention practical jokes between trappers, songs sung off-key, contests to see who could light a fire fastest or eat the weirdest thing found in the woods. It was crude, often ridiculous, but laughter was its own survival skill. You recall an anecdote about a fur trader named Henry Coulter who bet his companion he could make pancakes using only bear fat and cornmeal. He did. They were uneatable. The two men laughed so hard they burned down their camp stove. That's how people stayed sane. Not through stoicism, but through small, absurd moments of levity. Still, loneliness crept in. Some coped by writing letters they'd never send. Others carved initials into trees, hoping someone might one day see them and know they existed. Those carvings, faded, moss-covered, still dot parts of North America today, their time capsules of longing. You pause and picture one now, JT 1836. Still alive, 2 words, still alive. That's not just a statement, it's defiance. Even after centuries, it rings like a heartbeat in the wood. By the time you reach the ridge overlooking the valley, the stars are wheeling overhead. You remember how frontiersmen used them as guides, but also as reminders that they weren't completely alone. Every traveler who ever looked up saw the same constellations, the same cold beauty, the same ancient map of light. Some believed those stars were spirits watching. Others thought they were campfires of the dead. Historians still debate how much of frontier spirituality was borrowed from indigenous beliefs, how much from European folklore. But either way, it gave meaning to the vastness, to the endless waiting. You sit there for a while, the cool air brushing your skin. You think about how these people faced life without guarantees, how they learned to accept fear as normal. That kind of resilience feels alien now, but it also feels honest. Modern survival shows glamorize the struggle, but the truth is quieter. It's not cinematic, it's slow, repetitive, often boring. And yet, it shapes something unshakable inside you, the ability to endure. You realize the frontier mindset isn't gone, it's just buried under convenience. Every time you fix something instead of replacing it, every time you sit through discomfort instead of escaping it, a tiny spark of that old instinct wakes up. You can almost feel it now, the pulse of generations that refuse to quit. The wind picks up again, carrying the smell of sage and smoke. You imagine 1,000 campfires across centuries, burning in the same dark. Some of those flames have gone out, others might still be glowing, faintly, beneath the ashes. You close your eyes and for a moment, you hear them, the quiet murmurs of people who came before, whispering lessons we've forgotten. Keep walking. Keep warm. Keep believing the sun will rise. You smile, because it always does. Dawn crawls back over the land like a secret being revealed. The sky lightens from violet to amber, then to that gentle silver, blue that only appears before sunrise. You wake slowly, listening to the whisper of wind sliding through grass, to the hum of the living earth beneath you. Every sound feels ancient, older than words, older than memory. You rise and begin walking. The trail, if it can even be called that anymore, fades with every step, until you're moving only by instinct. Somewhere in the distance, a river murmurs. That's where you're headed. Your boots crunch over frost, and you think of all those who walked here before you, men and women who didn't have GPS, or forecasts, or rescue helicopters. Just a compass that sometimes lied, a gut that sometimes didn't, and a faith that the world, somehow, would let them see another morning. They survived because they adapted. But adaptation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. It was knowing when to fight and when to yield, when to move and when to wait. You recall one of the oldest frontier sayings, "Nature doesn't care if you're brave." That truth cuts deep. Out here, courage means nothing without humility. The moment you start thinking you've mastered the wild, it reminds you that you're only borrowing space. The river's edge appears, a slow shimmer through reeds. You kneel, cupping the icy water in your hands, tasting its clarity. It's so cold it bites. For a moment, you can almost feel the ghosts of 1,000 others doing the same. Scouts, wanderers, outlaws, all drinking from the same pulse of the land. You sit there, and the question creeps in, what have we lost? Not just skills, the ability to build fires, track animals, make rope from bark, but something deeper, awareness, gratitude. The intimacy of existing with nature instead of apart from it. Historians still argue whether the loss of those survival skills marks progress or decay. Some say technology freed us from danger. Others say it caged us in comfort. You don't have the answer. But you know this, frontiersmen lived awake. Every sight, every smell, every heartbeat mattered. Today we scroll instead of watch, click instead of craft. Our fires burn behind glass screens, not in the open night. And yet that spark isn't gone. It flickers in hikers who vanish into mountains for weeks, in farmers who feel the weather before they check the forecast, in children who build shelters out of sticks and mud just to see if they could survive a storm. It's still there. In you. You remember the first time you lit a fire without matches, the way your heart leaped when it caught. That tiny flame felt like victory, didn't it? That's the same heartbeat that carried entire generations across continents. The difference is, they depended on it. We've just forgotten that we could. You stare into the distance as the sun finally breaks the horizon, gold spilling across the plains. For a heartbeat, you see the land as they did, wild, unforgiving, beautiful beyond reason. You imagine the wagon trains creaking westward, the lonely trappers huddled by their fires, the silent watchers who left no names behind. Somewhere among them, a young frontiersman sharpens his knife. A woman stirs stew made from roots and hope, and a child falls asleep to the sound of wind whistling through the cracks of a log cabin. You realize their story isn't just history, it's inheritance. Those forgotten survival skills were never truly lost. They're sleeping in our DNA, waiting for a reason to wake. If the lights ever went out for good, if the grid failed, if civilization stumbled, you'd remember more than you think. Your hands would find the rhythm. Your instincts would whisper, "You've done this before." Because in some ancestral way you have. You pick up a fallen branch and study it. The bark flakes away under your thumb, revealing pale wood beneath. It's ordinary, but in the right hands it could be a weapon, a tool, a signal, or a memory. The frontier wasn't about heroism. It was about imagination, the ability to see purpose in everything. Even the stars above you still serve their purpose. The same constellations that guided travelers across the wilderness now glow above city skylines unchanged. Their light takes thousands of years to reach us, but it still arrives. Maybe survival is like that, old wisdom, traveling across generations, finally touching us again when we need it most. You close your eyes, breathing in the smell of river mist and pine. The morning hums around you, the slow rebirth of the world after another night survived. You smile, because that's what this was always about, wasn't it? Not conquering nature, not outsmarting it, just surviving it, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. And somewhere, deep inside, that frontier fire still burns. Wind down 300 words now, let your breathing slow. The sounds of the wilderness soften, the river whispering, the birds waking, the endless hush of wind moving through the grass. You can almost feel the sun's warmth spilling gently over your face, drawing the chill out of your bones. Every muscle loosens, every thought begins to drift. You've traveled far tonight. across centuries, across miles of untamed land, through storms and silence in the strange, sacred art of survival. You've learned what it meant to live without safety nets, to build comfort from nothing but will. And maybe, as you lie here, you realize something deeper, that you still carry those instincts. They've just been quiet, waiting for stillness to be heard. The frontiersmen are gone, but their wisdom lingers, in the fire you light, the patience you practice, the courage you find in small, uncertain moments. That's the inheritance of the wild resilience dressed in humility, bravery wrapped in simplicity. The stars fade slowly as the sky brightens, and the last echoes of your journey dissolve into morning. You're warm, safe. The story is done. So, close your eyes. Let the rhythm of your breath blend with the rhythm of the earth, and as sleep pulls you gently under, remember, the frontier never truly ends. It just waits quietly somewhere inside you. Sweet dreams.